To escape her violent ex, she kissed a stranger, unaware he was a vampire king who'd change her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Lila had never felt so trapped. She had been stuck in a cycle of fear and pain for what seemed like an eternity. Her once loving relationship had turned into a nightmare, with her violent ex, Tom, controlling every aspect of her life. She had tried to leave him before, but each time he found her, and each time, his temper became more dangerous. He had beaten her once, then again, until she couldn't remember what it was like to feel safe. The bruises on her body were only part of the story. The scars he left on her soul were far deeper. This time, however, something inside her snapped. She had to leave. She couldn't live like this anymore. It was a dark and rainy night when she decided to escape for good. Tom was out drinking, as usual, and Lila seized the opportunity. She packed a small bag, grabbed what little money she had left, and slipped out the back door of their apartment. The streets were slick with rain, and the air felt cold against her skin as she walked aimlessly, unsure of where to go. But it didn't matter. She just had to get away. Her heart pounded as she heard the faint sound of footsteps behind her. It was probably just the echo of her own hurried steps, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her. She quickened her pace, turning down a dark alley that led to the city's edge. That's when she saw him. A man standing by a black car, leaning casually against it, his silhouette barely visible in the dim streetlight. He looked at her as if he were waiting for someone, but when she caught his eye, she felt an odd sense of calm. His face was hard to read, but there was something captivating about him. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but she had nowhere else to go, and she didn't want to risk running into Tom again. So she approached him. "Are you lost?" the man asked, his voice low and smooth, like velvet. Lila looked up at him, her throat dry. I'm just trying to get away," she stammered, not knowing what to say. The man studied her for a moment, his intense gaze never leaving hers. "You're running from something, aren't you?" Lila nodded, her chest tightening with fear. He seemed to understand, as if he could sense her fear without her having to say a word. Without another word, he gestured to the car. "Come with me," he said, his tone commanding but not unkind. Lila hesitated again, but something about the way he spoke made her feel safe. Or at least, safer than she had felt in a long time. She climbed into the car without a second thought, and they drove off into the night, the city lights fading behind them. As they drove in silence, Lila couldn't help but feel a strange pull towards him. She wasn't sure why, but there was something about him that felt different from anyone she had ever met. His presence was undeniable, like a force of nature. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she felt drawn to him. The car finally stopped in front of a large, imposing mansion. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen anything so grand. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice shaky. The man turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You're safe here," he said simply. Lila didn't know if she believed him, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her fear lift just a little. What was it about this stranger that made her feel this way? And who was he, really? She had no idea, but she was about to find out. "I know you're confused right now. I understand the fear you must feel. But trust me, you're safe here." The man's voice was calm, but there was an intensity in it that made Lila feel even more unsettled. She had no idea what had just happened, but everything about the night seemed unreal, like she was caught in the middle of a dream. The mansion in front of her was grand, its stone walls towering above her like some ancient fortress. As the car pulled up to the front door, a sense of dread mixed with curiosity stirred inside her. The man, who had been silent since they arrived, opened his door and gestured for her to follow. Lila hesitated but stepped out of the car, her legs feeling wobbly beneath her. He led her inside the mansion, through a large oak door that creaked eerily as it swung open. The interior was nothing like she had ever seen. The floor was made of polished marble that gleamed under the dim lights, and the walls were adorned with grand paintings and antique furniture. Everything about this place screamed power, wealth, and history. They walked down a long hallway, passing doors on either side, until they reached a large, well-lit room. It was filled with plush couches and velvet curtains that hung from the windows like something out of an old movie. A fire crackled softly in the fireplace, adding a warm glow to the otherwise cold, imposing room. "Make yourself comfortable," the man said, his voice still carrying that calm, yet commanding tone. He gestured toward one of the chairs by the fire, but Lila couldn't bring herself to sit down just yet. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question had been nagging at her ever since they had met, but now that she was in his house, surrounded by wealth she could never imagine, it felt even more urgent. The man paused for a moment, looking at her with a strange expression. "I told you before," he said slowly. "You're safe here. That's all you need to know for now." Lila felt the weight of his words sink in. Something wasn't right. She could feel it in the air, the strange pull of something beyond her comprehension. He wasn't just a man. There was something ancient about him, something dangerous. But she didn't know how to ask the right questions. Before she could speak again, the man turned and walked over to a cabinet. He pulled out a glass of dark liquid, his movements smooth and precise. "I think you've had enough excitement for one night," he said, handing her the glass. "Drink this. It will help you relax." Lila took the glass hesitantly, staring at the dark liquid swirling. Inside, it didn't look like anything she had ever seen before, but she didn't want to argue. She had no place to go, no one to turn to. As she took a sip, the warmth spread through her body, calming her nerves almost immediately. The tension in her shoulders seemed to melt away, and she felt the tightness in her chest loosen. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of peace. But it was short-lived. The man, who was now sitting across from her, studied her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You don't trust me, do you?" he asked. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Lila opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, she didn't trust him. Not yet. But something about his presence, something magnetic and almost hypnotic, made her want to. He leaned forward slightly, his piercing eyes never leaving hers. "I can tell what you're thinking. You're wondering who I am, why you're here. The answer is simple. I'm someone who can protect you." From him. His words caught Lila off guard, and her heart skipped a beat. "Who?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Your ex," he said with a chilling calmness. "He's been looking for you. He won't stop until he finds you." The mention of Tom's name sent a jolt of panic through her. She had spent the last few months running from him, but now she was trapped in this mansion with a man who claimed to be able to protect her. But protect her from what exactly? "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The man smiled, but it wasn't a smile that made her feel better. It was the kind of smile that made her feel like he knew something she didn't. "Because," he said slowly, "I'm not just anyone. I am the Vampire King, and it's my duty to protect those who need it the most. And you, Lila, need me more than you realize." His words hung in the air, the gravity of them sinking into her bones. Vampire King? She couldn't believe it. The idea seemed ridiculous, but looking into his eyes, she couldn't deny that there was something otherworldly about him. And for some reason, she couldn't look away. "I know this is hard to believe, Lila, but I can prove it to you." The man's voice was firm yet gentle, as though he had said these words 1,000 times before. Lila stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to accept what he was saying, but her mind was clouded with doubt and fear. Vampire King? It felt like a ridiculous story, one that belonged in a fantasy novel, not her life. But there was something about him, something in the way he looked at her that made her question everything. She had felt safe with him, but now, everything seemed so surreal. "What do you mean by protect me?" she asked, her voice shaky. "From him," he said again, his voice darkening slightly. "Your ex. He's not just any man. He's dangerous, Lila. He's been tracking you, and he won't stop until he finds you. He's dangerous, far more dangerous than you can imagine. But I can help you. I can keep you safe." The man stood up from his chair, walking over to a table in the corner of the room. He pulled out a map, unrolling it in front of her. "This is the city," he said, pointing to the map. "And this is where you were. He's already been to every place you've stayed in. He's close, Lila. You need to leave before he finds you again." Lila's stomach twisted. Tom had always found her. No matter where she went, no matter how hard she tried to run, he always found her. The idea that he was still out there, hunting her down, made her blood run cold. "How do you know all this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "I told you. I'm the Vampire King. I have eyes everywhere. I know things that others don't. And I know that you're in danger." Lila felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't know what to think. Was he really a Vampire King? Or was he just some man trying to control her life? The more she thought about it, the more confused she became. But one thing was certain. Tom was still out there. And she couldn't keep running forever. She looked up at the man, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do I do?" He walked back to her, his gaze softening. "You come. With me. You'll be safe here. I'll protect you. No one will hurt you again. I swear it." Lila hesitated. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone anymore? But she didn't have a choice. She couldn't go back to her old life. Not with Tom out there. Not with the constant fear of being caught. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I'll stay." The man nodded, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Good. I'll take care of everything from here." As he turned away, Lila couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Tom was still out there, and no matter how powerful this man was, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much more complicated. Over the next few days, Lila tried to settle into her new life. The mansion was enormous, filled with more rooms than she could count. She spent most of her time in the library, reading books and trying to distract herself from the constant worry gnawing at her. She knew she was safe, for now, but that didn't stop her mind from racing. Every time she heard a car in the driveway, every time she heard footsteps down the hall, her heart would race. Was it Tom? Was he finally here? But the man, the Vampire King, kept reassuring her that she was safe. He promised that no one would hurt her again. "You're free here, Lila," he would tell her. "No one will find you. Not while I'm here." And for a while, it was enough to silence the voices in her head. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, as she was reading in the library, she heard a knock on the door. It was late, too late for visitors. She stood up quickly, her heart racing in her chest. The door opened, and the man entered, his expression serious. "We need to talk," he said. "It's about your ex. He's closer than we thought." Lila's stomach dropped. She could feel it then, the fear creeping back in. This wasn't over. It wasn't over at all. "I told you, Lila, your ex is closing in. He's much closer than we thought." The man's voice was low, urgent, and it sent a chill through Lila's spine. She had been trying to ignore the fear that had been steadily growing inside her, but now it was back, stronger than ever. She had thought that once she was inside the mansion, once she was safe with the Vampire King, everything would be okay. But nothing ever felt safe enough. "What do you mean?" Lila asked, her heart hammering in her chest. She stood up from the chair, pacing the room as her anxiety spiked. "How do you know he's close?" The Vampire King's eyes darkened. "I have my ways. I have people watching. I know where he's been, where he's going. He's not just a man you can run from, Lila. He's dangerous, and he won't stop until he has you back." Lila's breath caught in her throat. Tom had always seemed like the kind of man who would never let go, but now, hearing the weight in the Vampire King's voice, she understood just how much danger she was truly in. "He's never going to stop, is he?" she whispered, almost to herself. The Vampire King didn't answer immediately. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over the moonlit grounds. "No," he said quietly, his voice heavy with a kind of knowing sadness. "And it's not just him. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into. Tom is part of something much larger. There are forces at play here that you don't understand." Lila's mind was racing. She had spent so much time running from Tom, from the pain, from the violence. But now, the reality of it was sinking in. Tom wasn't just an abusive ex. He was part of something much bigger, and she was trapped in the middle of it. She turned to face the Vampire King, her eyes filled with desperation. "What should I do? How can I get away from him for good?" The Vampire King's gaze softened slightly, though it still carried an intensity that made her feel small. "You can't run anymore," he said. "You have to face him. You have to stop hiding." The words hit Lila like a punch to the gut. She had spent so long hiding, so long living in fear, that the thought of facing Tom again, of confronting him, seemed impossible. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe he was right. Running hadn't worked before, and it wouldn't work now. But how? Lila asked, her voice trembling. The Vampire King looked at her, his expression unreadable. I will protect you. But you have to trust me, Lila. You have to trust that I will help you. And you have to be prepared to fight. The words sent a surge of uncertainty through her. Fight. She had never been the fighting type. She had always been the one who ran, who hid, who avoided conflict at all costs. But now, with the threat of Tom closing in, running didn't seem like an option. She had to be strong. For herself. For her future. I trust you, Lila said, though the words felt heavy on her tongue. She wasn't sure if she meant them, but she had no choice. She couldn't keep running forever. She had to take control of her life, even if it meant facing the one person who had ruined it. The Vampire King's gaze softened. Good, he said. Then we'll face this together. You won't have to face him alone. Lila nodded, though she still felt a deep sense of fear in the pit of her stomach. But she also felt something else. Something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe for the first time in a long time, she believed that she had a chance at a different life. A better life. The Vampire King's words stayed with her as she lay in bed that night, staring out the window at the dark sky. She knew the next few days would be crucial. They would determine everything. Whether she would face Tom once and for all, or whether she would run again. But this time, she wasn't sure she wanted to run anymore. She didn't know what would happen, but for the first time in ages, she was ready to find out. I know you're scared, Lila. I understand it's hard, but you need to remember, you're not alone anymore. The Vampire King's voice was steady, but there was an underlying urgency in his words that made Lila's heart race. She had never felt more uncertain in her life. She had spent the last few months running from her past, hiding from the man who had made her life a nightmare. But now, it was time to confront him. Tom was closer than ever. She could feel it. In her bones. Every moment spent in this mansion felt like a countdown, a ticking clock, and Lila wasn't sure how much time she had left. She sat at the grand table in the library, staring out the window at the darkened grounds. The Vampire King had given her time to think, time to prepare. But what was she supposed to prepare for? Confronting Tom felt like the hardest thing she would ever have to do. What if I can't do it? She whispered, more to herself than to him. The Vampire King stood across the room, watching her with his intense gaze. His eyes, an almost glowing amber, seemed to pierce through her doubts. You can, Lila. You've been through worse. You survived him once. You'll survive again. His words were like a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of panic. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The weight of everything, the past, the fear, the uncertainty, was too much. She had spent so long hiding, so long running, and now, facing Tom again felt like facing her own death. But I'm not the same person anymore, she said quietly. I'm not the scared girl I was when I first left him. But I still don't know if I'm strong enough to stand up to him. The Vampire King's gaze softened, though his expression remained serious. Strength doesn't always come from physical power, Lila. Sometimes, the greatest strength is standing up for yourself when you think you can't. I'm not going to fight this battle for you, but I'll be right there beside you, every step of the way. His words were like a spark in her chest. For the first time, she felt something other than fear. She felt a sense of purpose. She could do this. She had to. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. I'll face him. I'll fight for myself. The Vampire King gave her a small nod, acknowledging her decision. Good. It's time to end this, once and for all. They spent the next few hours preparing. The Vampire King gave her information on Tom's whereabouts, showing her maps and contacts who had been tracking him. But Lila wasn't just preparing physically. She was preparing mentally and emotionally. She had to remind herself that this time, she wasn't running. She was standing her ground. She wasn't going to let Tom control her anymore. The clock seemed to tick louder in the silence of the room. Every minute felt like an eternity. Finally, after what seemed like an age, the moment arrived. Lila stood in front of the mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. The Vampire King stood beside her, his presence reassuring but distant, as though he knew this was her fight, not his. Are you ready? He asked, his voice low and steady. Lila nodded, though her hands were shaking. She didn't know if she was ready, but she had no choice. She couldn't keep living in fear. Let's do this, she said, her voice firm. The Vampire King gave her one last look, a silent promise that he would be there if things went wrong. Together, they walked toward the car that would take them to Tom. Lila's stomach twisted in knots as they drove through the dark streets, her mind racing with thoughts of what would happen when they arrived. What would Tom say? How would he react? Would he try to hurt her again? The car stopped in front of an old warehouse on the edge of town, its windows dark and silent. Lila felt her pulse quicken. She recognized the place. It was where Tom had kept her locked up during their worst days together. The memories came rushing back, and for a moment, she felt like she was going to be sick. But she couldn't back down now. She had to face him. The Vampire King stepped out of the car first, his powerful figure moving with a quiet authority. Lila followed, her legs feeling like lead. She was terrified, but she refused to let it show. She wasn't that scared girl anymore. She wasn't running anymore. She was going to end this. Together, they walked into the warehouse, the heavy door creaking as they opened it. The dim light flickered overhead as they made their way inside. And then, Lila saw him. Tom. He was standing there, his back turned to them, but he knew they were there. Lila felt a wave of disgust wash over her, and she had to force herself to breathe. Lila, Tom said, his voice dripping with mockery. You finally came back. I knew you couldn't resist. Lila didn't answer at first. She just stood there, looking at him. He wasn't the same man she had once known. He was older, angrier, and the malice in his eyes was more intense than she remembered. But something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let him have power over her anymore. I'm not yours anymore, Tom, Lila said, her voice cold. And I'm not afraid of you. Tom's eyes flashed with rage, and for a moment, Lila thought he might strike her. But the Vampire King stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. If you even think about touching her, I'll make sure you regret it, he said, his voice dark with power. Tom took a step back, his face draining of color. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Who are you? He demanded. The Vampire King smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. I'm the one who's going to make sure you never hurt her again. Lila stood tall beside him, feeling a surge of confidence. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't afraid anymore. And with the Vampire King by her side, she knew she could finally face Tom and take back the life he had stolen from her. I know you think you can still control this, Tom, but you can't. The Vampire King's voice was cold, his eyes glowing with an eerie intensity that seemed to strip away any pretense Tom had left. Lila stood next to him, the realization finally sinking in that she wasn't the scared, helpless girl she had been. She was stronger now, and she was no longer going to let Tom hold power over her. Tom's expression twisted with fury, but he didn't move. It was as if the words hadn't quite sunk in, as if he was still trying to process the fact that Lila had truly come here to face him. You think you can threaten me? Tom sneered, his eyes darting nervously between Lila and the Vampire King. You're just a freak, some power-hungry monster who thinks he can intimidate me. The Vampire King's smile was a chilling thing, full of danger. You're right about one thing, he said, his voice like silk. I am powerful. But I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here to end this. For good. Lila could feel the tension in the air, like something was about to snap. She glanced over at the Vampire King, then back at Tom. She couldn't believe she was standing here, facing him like this. She had spent so many years running, hiding, scared of what he might do. But now it was her turn to stand her ground. Tom, the man who had once controlled her life with his rage, was no longer the monster she feared. He was just a man, a weak, angry man, and she was done being afraid of him. You're pathetic, Lila said, her voice firm, finally finding her strength. You think you have power over me, but you don't. Not anymore. Tom's eyes widened in shock as he took a step back. The Vampire King's presence beside her was undeniable, like an impenetrable force that made him shrink in comparison. Lila had never seen him like this before, so broken, so small. You're going to regret this, Tom growled, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. Lila could see it in his eyes, the terror of knowing he no longer had control. The Vampire King stepped forward, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Tom. No, Tom, he said, his voice low but filled with an undeniable power. You're the one who's going to regret everything. This ends now. With those words, the tension in the air seemed to shift, the power dynamics changing in an instant. Lila felt it too, an overwhelming sense of liberation, like a heavy weight was being lifted off her shoulders. She was free. This was it. She was finally taking her life back. Tom hesitated, his body trembling slightly. as if he was trying to summon the courage to strike. But the Vampire King's aura, his ancient power, was too much for him. Tom looked between them, then at the door, as if considering running. But the Vampire King was too quick. With a wave of his hand, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash, trapping Tom in the room. "Where do you think you're going?" the Vampire King asked, his voice cold as ice. Tom spun around, his face pale. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it. Lila, please." Lila's heart twisted, but only for a moment. This wasn't the man she had once loved. This was the man who had tormented her, who had destroyed everything good in her life. "No," she said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "You don't get to beg anymore. You don't get to manipulate me." Tom's face twisted in a mix of anger and desperation. He took a step toward her, but the Vampire King was there in an instant, blocking his path. "I warned you, Tom," the Vampire King said, his voice darker than ever. "You won't touch her again." The air in the room crackled with energy, and for a moment, Lila thought she could see a shadow flicker in the Vampire King's eyes. It was a reminder of who he truly was, an ancient, powerful creature who had been through centuries of pain and loss. And now, he was here to protect her. I never meant to hurt you," Tom said, his voice cracking. "Please, just let me go. I'll leave. I'll leave you alone." Lila shook her head. "You don't get to decide that anymore. Not after everything you've done to me." The words felt like freedom, like chains breaking. It was the final piece of the puzzle. She was done being afraid. She was done being the victim. "Leave," she ordered, her voice cold. Tom stared at her for a long moment, but he knew the battle was over. The Vampire King was too powerful, and Lila was no longer the girl he could control. He turned and ran out of the room, disappearing into the night. Lila stood there for a moment, her breath shaky but relieved. She felt the weight of everything. The years of fear, the years of running, finally lift. And when she turned to the Vampire King, she knew that this was just the beginning of her new life. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. The Vampire King gave her a small smile. "You did it yourself," he replied. "But I'll always be here if you need me." And with that, Lila finally understood. She had the strength to stand on her own, but with him by her side, she would never have to face the world alone again. "I thought that once Tom was gone, everything would fall into place. But as the days passed, I realized how wrong I was." Lila had been free from him for so long, yet the memories still haunted her. The nights were the worst, when the silence felt heavy and her thoughts wandered back to the days of fear. The Vampire King could offer her protection, but there were scars that no amount of power could erase. She was not the same girl she once was. But how could she move forward when the past kept holding her back? Lila spent the next few days pacing around the mansion, lost in her own thoughts. Despite everything, she felt like something was missing. She had broken free from Tom's hold, but there was still a part of her that felt incomplete, as if she hadn't yet fully escaped from the darkness he had cast over her life. One evening, she found herself in the garden, staring up at the stars. The air was cool, and the scent of the flowers was calming, but her mind was still racing. She didn't know what to do with herself now. She had wanted to be free, but freedom felt empty. "You're not alone, Lila," a voice said from behind her. She turned and saw the Vampire King standing a few feet away, his figure bathed in the soft light of the garden. He had been watching her for a while, and she knew that he could sense her turmoil. "I didn't know what to expect," she said, her voice quiet. "I thought everything would be okay after he was gone, but it's like I'm still trapped in my own head. How do I move on?" The Vampire King took a step closer, his gaze steady and understanding. "You don't have to move on right away," he said. "Healing takes time. It's not something that happens overnight, but you are stronger than you think." Lila looked at him, unsure if she believed his words. She wanted to be strong, wanted to believe that she could leave the past behind, but it felt so difficult. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to be the person I want to be when I'm still carrying all this weight inside." The Vampire King walked over to her, standing beside her in the quiet garden. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said. "I'm here. I'll always be here." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that settled in her chest, calming the storm inside her, if only for a moment. She turned to face him, the darkness in her mind slowly starting to recede. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to feel trapped in my own past. The Vampire King smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that made her feel as though everything would eventually be okay. You don't have to be afraid. You're free now, and no one can take that from you. As the days turned into weeks, Lila began to heal. Slowly, but surely, the weight in her heart started to lift. The Vampire King remained by her side, always there when she needed him, offering her guidance and strength. And though Lila still had moments of doubt, of fear, she no longer felt like a prisoner to her past. She was learning to live again, to take control of her own future. But just as she began to believe that she was finally moving forward, something unexpected happened. One evening, as she was returning to the mansion after a walk in the nearby town, she noticed something strange. There was a figure standing at the gates of the mansion, waiting for her. As she got closer, her heart skipped a beat. It was Tom. He had found her. The panic that had been buried deep inside her rose to the surface, and for a moment, she froze. She thought she was done with him. She thought she was free. But there he was, standing in front of her, a shadow from her past that she couldn't outrun. Lila, he said, his voice low and filled with anger. You can't keep running forever. I'm not going to let you go. Lila felt a surge of fear flood her chest, but she quickly pushed it down. She wasn't that same scared girl anymore. She had come too far to let him control her again. The Vampire King appeared at her side, his presence like a shield. You're not welcome here, he said, his voice dark and commanding. Tom sneered, his eyes full of hate. You think you can protect her? She's mine. The Vampire King stepped forward, his stance unwavering. You don't have a claim on her. Not anymore. Lila stood tall, her voice steady as she faced Tom. I'm not yours, Tom. I never will be again. I don't need you. I never did. Tom's expression twisted in fury, and for a moment, Lila thought he might try to fight. But something in the Vampire King's presence made him hesitate. You're not getting away this time. Tom spat, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. The Vampire King took another step forward, his aura of power palpable. You've already lost, Tom. Leave. Now. There was a finality to his words that left no room for argument. Tom's face turned pale, and with one last glare at Lila, he turned and fled, disappearing into the night. Lila stood there, her heart still racing, but she felt a sense of victory wash over her. She had faced her fear, and this time, she had won. I didn't know what to expect after Tom left. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The Vampire King stood by my side, his presence like a solid wall that shielded me from the past I had tried so hard to escape. But as much as I wanted to believe everything was finally over, I knew deep down that it wasn't. The night felt heavy, charged with a strange energy, like the calm before a storm. Even though Tom was gone, the reality of what had just happened was still sinking in. I had finally stood up to him, but could I keep my courage? The Vampire King turned to me, his amber eyes softening. You did well, he said, his voice calm but filled with an understanding that made me feel like I wasn't alone anymore. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I don't know if I can keep doing this, I confessed. What if he comes back again? His gaze hardened, his posture strong as always, and he stepped closer. He won't. He knows his place now. And even if he did come back, he wouldn't stand a chance. His words were reassuring, but they didn't entirely erase the fear that lingered in the pit of my stomach. I had always lived in fear of Tom, and no matter how much time passed, I couldn't just erase those years of terror. You're safe now, the Vampire King said, sensing my hesitation. The people who tried to harm you will no longer have any power over you. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to close my eyes and let myself feel at peace, but my past was still a ghost that haunted me. Even with the Vampire King by my side, I couldn't forget the fear, the pain, and the years of being trapped. It's hard, I whispered. I'm supposed to feel free, but I feel like I'm still stuck. Still looking over my shoulder. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder, and for a moment, his touch felt like a promise. Freedom isn't just about getting away from the past, he said softly. It's about learning to live without fear. And you will. One step at a time. His words were comforting, but I knew they couldn't just make the pain disappear. Still, something in the way he spoke made me want to try. He was right. I had to keep moving forward, even if it felt impossible at times. The fear was still there, but it didn't have to define me anymore. I'm not going anywhere, Lila, he added, his voice steady and reassuring. And you don't have to face this alone. I looked at him then, really looked at him. There was something in his eyes, a depth of understanding that made me feel like I wasn't just some victim to be protected. I was a person who could stand on my own, who could take back my life. And with him by my side, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. I'm not afraid anymore, I said, my voice growing stronger. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, but I meant them. For the first time in a long time, I believed them. The Vampire King smiled at me, a rare, genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. I knew you had it in you, he said, his voice warm. You're stronger than you realize. We stood there for a while, in the quiet of the night, as if the world had slowed down just for us. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let fear control me anymore. And I wasn't going to face it alone. As the days passed, I began to feel the weight of the past lift just a little more. I spent more time with the Vampire King, and in his company, I started to realize something. It wasn't just his power that made him special. It was his kindness, his patience, and his ability to see beyond the surface. He didn't just protect me. He helped me see myself in a new light. And the more time we spent together, the more I realized that there was more to our connection than just protection. I was starting to care for him in a way I hadn't expected. But what did that mean? I wasn't sure. But for once, I wasn't afraid to find out. One evening, as the sun began to set, we found ourselves in the garden again, standing side by side. The air was cool, and the smell of flowers filled the air. I could hear the distant rustle of leaves in the trees, and for a moment, everything felt normal, peaceful. Lila, the Vampire King said, breaking the silence. There's something I need to tell you. I turned to look at him, my heart racing. What could it be? What is it? I asked. He paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. I never expected this, he said, his gaze shifting slightly. I never expected to find someone like you. Someone who could make me feel this way. My heart skipped a beat. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? The air between us suddenly felt charged, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. I don't know what it means yet, he continued. But I do know that you've changed everything for me. And I can't ignore that. My breath caught in my throat. He cared for me. I could feel it, deep down. The realization hit me like a wave, and for the first time in ages, I allowed myself to truly hope. The fear of the past was still there, but it was fading. And with him, maybe, just maybe, I could have a future where I didn't have to look over my shoulder anymore. We were just standing there, in the quiet of the garden, and for once, I felt like I could breathe. This was only the beginning. And whatever came next, I knew I was ready to face it. I never thought I'd find myself here, standing next to a man who was more than just a protector. He was someone who had helped me reclaim my life. But now, as we stood side by side in the garden, the quiet calm was only temporary. There was something in the air that felt like it was building up to something more. The Vampire King had confessed something to me that I wasn't sure how to process. His words were still echoing in my mind. I never expected to find someone like you. But was this really what I wanted? I had lived so long in fear, unable to trust anyone. And now, this bond was forming, one I hadn't anticipated, one that was changing everything I knew. What does this mean? I asked, finally breaking the silence that had settled between us. My voice was quiet, but I could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air. The Vampire King turned to face me, his eyes filled with a strange, tender intensity. He seemed to be considering his words carefully, as if deciding how much of himself he wanted to reveal. It means that I can't ignore what's happening between us, he said, his voice low and steady. I'm not sure what it means either, but I know it's real, and I know that I don't want to lose it. His words struck a chord deep within me. For so long, I had kept myself hidden, trapped by my own fears. But here was a man who had seen past all of that, who was offering me something I never thought I deserved: trust, protection, and something deeper that I wasn't sure how to define. But even as he spoke, a part of me still hesitated. I wasn't used to being this vulnerable. I don't know if I'm ready for this, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can trust anyone again. The Vampire King reached out, placing a hand gently on my arm. You don't have to trust anyone else, Lila. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But you can trust me. I'm not going anywhere. His words, simple and yet profound, struck me to the core. How could I not trust him? He had been there for me when no one else had. He had given me the strength to stand up to Tom, to take control of my life. And now, I was realizing that maybe, just maybe, I had the strength to trust again. I'm scared, I confessed, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I'm scared of what this might mean, of how it will change everything. The Vampire King nodded, his expression softening. Fear is natural, but fear doesn't have to control you. You have a choice now, Lila. You can choose to step forward into something new, something better. Or you can stay in the past, locked in the same place you've been for so long. The choice is yours. I looked at him, my heart racing. It wasn't just about facing Tom anymore. It was about facing the future, about taking a chance on something I never thought was possible. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let fear stop me from living. I want to move forward, I said, my voice firm, the weight of my decision settling in. I don't know what's ahead, but I'm ready to find out. The Vampire King's gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. Then let's take the first step together. The next few days were a blur of changes. The more time I spent with the Vampire King, the more I realized how much I had yet to learn. He wasn't just a protector. He was a teacher, a guide, showing me what it meant to truly live free. I started to see the world in a new light. I was no longer the girl hiding from her past. I was becoming someone stronger, someone who could stand on her own 2 feet, with or without him. But even as I embraced this new version of myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that Tom wasn't finished with me. The fear still lingered, a constant shadow that followed me wherever I went. And then, one evening, the shadow stepped into the light. I was walking back to the mansion after spending some time in town when I saw him again. Tom. His figure was unmistakable, standing at the gates of the mansion, looking like a ghost from the past. My heart skipped a beat, and panic flooded through me. No, I whispered to myself, my breath catching in my throat. But it wasn't just fear that gripped me. It was the knowledge that I couldn't run anymore. The Vampire King appeared beside me, his presence steady and unwavering. Don't worry, he said quietly. You're not alone. As we approached, Tom turned, his eyes narrowing when he saw us. You think you can hide behind him? He spat, his voice filled with venom. The Vampire King stepped forward, his posture commanding, but his voice calm. You're not welcome here, Tom. Leave, before you regret it. Tom sneered, taking a step toward me. She'll never be free of me. You can't protect her forever. But the Vampire King was too fast. Before Tom could make another move, he was shoved back, a warning in the air. You don't get to make the rules anymore. Tom's face twisted in rage, but he could see the determination in both of our eyes. Slowly, he backed away, realizing that he had lost. This isn't over, he snarled, but it didn't matter. He had no power here. Yes, it is, I said firmly, my voice no longer shaking. It's finally over. Tom turned and fled, disappearing into the night, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the past truly lift. The Vampire King stood beside me, his presence a steady reminder of how far I had come. It's over, Lila, he said softly. You're free. And in that moment, I realized that I finally was. I thought I had finally freed myself. But the moment Tom disappeared into the night, I realized that freedom didn't feel like I expected. There was still an emptiness inside me, a hollow space where the fear used to live. It was gone. Yes, but what replaced it? What did life look like without the constant weight of dread on my shoulders? I wasn't sure, but I was willing to find out. The Vampire King stood beside me, his eyes steady, watching the path Tom had taken. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the strength in his presence, like a shield that had always been there. Are you okay? He asked after a moment, his voice soft yet filled with concern. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was. I was free, but I was still trying to figure out what that meant. I'm just trying to process everything, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch both reassuring and grounding. Take your time, he said. You don't have to rush. I appreciated his words, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just getting rid of Tom. There was a shift in the air, a tension I couldn't place. And as I looked up at him, I realized that the Vampire King wasn't just protecting me anymore. He was becoming something more to me, something I didn't know how to define. Do you ever get tired of protecting people? I asked suddenly, unsure why I was asking, but the words just slipped out. The Vampire King gave me a long, thoughtful look before he answered. I don't get tired of protecting the people I care about, he said quietly. And I care about you, Lila. I've never felt like this before. His words made my heart race, and for the first time, I allowed myself to consider what they meant. The fear of being vulnerable was still there, but the more I spent time with him, the more I realized that maybe I wasn't as afraid of him as I once thought. Maybe I was afraid of what it meant to let someone in, to trust them completely. I care about you too, I said, my voice trembling just slightly. It felt strange to admit it, but it felt even stranger to hide it. The Vampire King's eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw a vulnerability in them that I hadn't seen before. I know, he said, his voice low. And that's what makes this so complicated. Complicated, I repeated, my brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? He looked away for a moment, as though trying to find the right words. I never expected to feel this way, Lila, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I've lived for centuries, and in all that time, I've never met anyone like you. You've changed me in ways I don't understand. I felt a flutter in my chest at his words, but there was also a knot of fear in my stomach. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? Was he starting to feel something for me beyond just protection? I don't know what this is, he continued, his voice filled with a quiet desperation. But I can't ignore it. I don't want to ignore it. His words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, everything felt suspended in time. I wanted to say something, anything, to fill the silence, but I couldn't find the words. The truth was, I didn't know what to do either. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. I had spent so much time hiding from my past, from my fears, and now here I was, faced with something completely unexpected. Something beautiful, yet terrifying. I don't want to hurt you, he said, his voice cracking just slightly. I've spent so long hiding from my own emotions. But you've made me want to feel again. His words were like a confession, and they made my heart ache. For a moment, I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that I felt the same way, that I didn't want to be afraid anymore either. But there was a part of me that still held back, a part of me that wasn't ready to admit how deeply I cared for him. I had spent so long afraid to open my heart. Was I ready to risk it all again? I don't want to hurt you either, I said softly, my voice trembling. But I'm scared. I'm scared of what this might mean. I've never felt like this before. The Vampire King took a deep breath, his expression softening. You don't have to have all the answers, Lila, he said gently. I don't either. But I know that I want to try. I want to try with you. The vulnerability in his voice was enough to break through my walls. For the first time, I didn't feel scared. I felt something else. Hope, maybe. Or maybe it was just the realization that I wasn't alone anymore. That we weren't alone anymore. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I knew in that moment that whatever came next, we would face it together. Okay, I said, my voice steady now. Let's try. Together. The Vampire King smiled, his eyes shining with something I hadn't seen before. Something warm, something real. He stepped closer to me, and I felt the pull between us, the bond that had been forming ever since we met. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid to let it in. Together, we could face whatever came next. Together, we could create a new future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a place in this world. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was finally living, and the future felt full of possibilities. I thought that after everything we had gone through, the hardest part was over. But in the days that followed, I realized how wrong I was. The calm after Tom's departure was only temporary. The quiet was deceiving, and the more time I spent with the Vampire King, the more I understood that our lives were far from simple. I had found a new strength in myself. Yes, but that didn't mean I was fully free. There were still things left unresolved. And I could feel it. Something was coming. One evening, after a long day of walking around the mansion's grounds, I found myself standing by the large windows in the sitting room, looking out at the darkening sky. The night was clear, but there was a tension in the air that I couldn't ignore. The Vampire King had been acting distant, though I could see it in his eyes. Something was on his mind. I could sense it. You're quiet tonight, I said, trying to break the silence. He looked up from the book he had been reading, his amber eyes meeting mine. Just thinking, he said, his voice softer than usual. About what? I asked, stepping closer. He closed the book gently and set it aside. About what comes next, he said, his tone serious. I could see the weight of his words, and it made my heart skip. What do you mean? We've already faced so much. I thought we were past it all. He sighed, standing up and walking toward me. You've been through a lot, Lila. More than anyone should have to. But there's more to the story than just getting rid of Tom. I furrowed my brow, trying to understand what he meant. What are you saying? Tom was just one piece of the puzzle, he said, his voice low. There are forces that wanted to control you long before you ever met him. And even though he's gone, the people behind him, the ones who sent him after you, they won't let go so easily. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as the words sank in. Tom had been bad enough, but the thought of other forces at play, forces that had been lurking in the shadows all along, made me feel like I hadn't truly escaped. You think they'll come after me again? I asked, my voice shaky. The Vampire King nodded. Yes, I'm afraid so. But this time, we'll be ready. I stood there, processing his words, as the weight of the situation settled on me. I don't want to run anymore, I said, my voice firm. I don't want to live in fear of these people forever. The Vampire King stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. You won't have to, he said gently. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. I promised you that. I looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity in them. And I'll keep my promise, he added, his voice unwavering. It felt like everything had led to this moment. This realization that no matter how much I had fought for freedom, the real battle was only just beginning. But I wasn't going to face it alone. He was with me. We were in this together. I'm ready, I said, feeling a new resolve within me. Let's face them together. The Vampire King smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. You're stronger than you know, Lila. And I'm proud of you. But remember, this won't be easy. I'm not afraid anymore, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I've faced my worst fear already. I'm not backing down now. That night, we made plans. The Vampire King showed me more of his world, the alliances he had, the enemies he had made over the centuries. There was more to his life than I had ever realized, and the deeper we went into his past, the more I understood why he had always kept his distance. He had fought battles, both physical and emotional, that I could never imagine. But he had never stopped fighting, and now I realized why. He had always fought for those he cared about. And he cared about me. The next few days were filled with preparations. The Vampire King had gathered information, made connections, and planned our next move. But no matter how much we planned, there was a part of me that knew that we couldn't predict everything. Things were changing, and not all of it was within our control. I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear, knowing that what we were about to face was bigger than anything we had experienced before. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't facing it alone. As we stood together in the heart of the mansion, preparing for whatever came next, I realized that I had a future that was no longer defined by fear, but by the choices I made. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor, and I had the strength to fight for the life I wanted. The road ahead was uncertain, but with the Vampire King by my side, I knew we could face anything. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a place in this world. A place where I wasn't just hiding, but living. And I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me. I had always thought that after Tom, after everything, I would finally be able to rest. But as the days passed, I realized how wrong I was. The peace I had felt after Tom's departure was short-lived. The weight that had once defined my every move was lifting, but now there was something else, an unfamiliar tension that hovered in the air. I could feel it in the Vampire King's eyes, in the quiet moments we shared. There was a storm brewing, something we weren't prepared for. I could tell he was holding something back, but he never spoke of it. We spent days training, preparing for the unknown, but there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that things were not over. I was standing at the edge of a new chapter, but there were still shadows lurking in the corners. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace, the Vampire King joined me. He looked different, tired, maybe, or burdened in a way he hadn't been before. I noticed how his usual calm was slipping, how his eyes seemed a little more guarded. He wasn't the same man who had been by my side, reassuring me through every fear. What's going on? I asked, unable to ignore the concern that built in my chest. He met my gaze, his expression hardening for a moment. There are things about my world that I've kept from you, he said, his voice low. Things that I couldn't tell you, not until now. I felt a knot form in my stomach. What kind of things? He stood up and walked across the room, his steps measured, as if he were calculating his words. I've been alive for centuries, Lila. And in all that time, I've made enemies, real enemies. People who would do anything to destroy what I care about. And now that you're involved, they'll come for you. They'll stop at nothing to break us apart. My heart raced as I listened to his words. For a moment, I couldn't speak. You told me it was over, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. You told me that no one would hurt me anymore. The Vampire King turned toward me, his face softening. I never wanted to lie to you, he said. But the truth is, as long as I'm around, you'll always be a target. And now that you're with me, it's not just me they'll go after. It's you, too. A cold wave of fear washed over me. I had thought that when Tom left, everything would go back to normal. But now, I was realizing that I had entered a world far more dangerous than I could have imagined. A world full of people who didn't care who got hurt as long as they got what they wanted. What do we do? I asked, my voice trembling. The Vampire King stepped closer, his gaze intense. We fight. We prepare for whatever comes next. But we don't run. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'm ready, I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. I don't want to be afraid anymore. He smiled softly, reaching out to take my hand. I'm proud of you, Lila. You've come so far. But the look in his eyes told me that we both knew this wasn't over. The battle was just beginning. That night, as we sat together, planning our next moves, I felt the weight of the world pressing in on us. The forces that were after us were not just dangerous, they were relentless. And now, they knew about me. They knew about us. I could feel the fear creeping back in, but this time, it was different. I wasn't alone anymore. The Vampire King was beside me, and together, we would face whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with preparations, but also with a strange sense of foreboding. I spent more time with the Vampire King, training, learning about his world, his enemies, and the dangers we faced. He taught me how to defend myself, how to stand tall in the face of fear. But there was always that underlying tension, that feeling that something was just around the corner. I knew, deep down, that no matter how much we prepared, we couldn't control what was coming. The night we had been waiting for came sooner than expected. We had received word that a group of the Vampire King's enemies had located us. They were closing in, and there was no turning back. The Vampire King was calm as ever, but I could see the resolve in his eyes. Tonight, we end this, he said, his voice steady. I nodded, my heart racing. For all the training, for all the preparation, nothing could prepare me for what was about to happen. This was the moment where everything changed. As we made our way to the designated location, I could feel the fear in my chest. It was raw, intense, and inescapable. But I also felt something else. Something stronger. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. The fight ahead would test everything I had learned, everything I had become. But I was ready. I had to be. Together, we stepped into the night, ready to face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This time, I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The night was thick with tension, the air alive with the energy of what was about to unfold. We had prepared for this moment for days, weeks even, but nothing could fully prepare me for the magnitude of what we were about to face. The Vampire King stood beside me, his presence solid and unwavering, but I could see the intensity in his eyes. He had lived through centuries of battles, but even he knew that this was different. This was the endgame. The enemies that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike, were closing in. There was no more time for planning. This was it. Are you ready? The Vampire King asked, his voice low and steady. I could hear the unspoken weight in his words. This wasn't just a battle. It was a defining moment for both of us. I looked at him, feeling the heat of the moment, the adrenaline starting to course through my veins. Yes, I said, my voice firm. I'm ready. The time for fear was long past. This was no longer about escaping my past. It was about standing tall, facing the darkness head on, and protecting the life I had finally started to build. The world I had known was about to change forever, but I wouldn't back down. We moved swiftly through the shadows, our steps synchronized. The Vampire King was a force of nature, his every movement precise, calculated, and filled with the power of someone who had lived through eons of conflict. And I, standing beside him, felt a new strength I had never known before. The enemies came in waves, their movements swift and coordinated. They were skilled, trained in the ways of shadow and silence, but they underestimated one thing: our resolve. The battle was intense, fast-paced, and relentless. At first, the enemy seemed unstoppable. They came at us from all sides, each attack more vicious than the last. But the Vampire King was an impenetrable shield, his strength an unyielding force. I fought beside him, my body moving on instinct, the training he had given me now a part of who I was. I wasn't the frightened girl I had once been. I was a warrior, standing side by side with the one person who had shown me that I could be more than just a survivor. We fought until our bodies screamed for rest, but there was no time for weakness. The battle raged on, and I could feel the tide turning in our favor. With every strike, every movement, we pushed forward. The enemy's resolve began to falter, their attacks less coordinated, more desperate. I could see it in their eyes. They had underestimated us. And in that moment, I realized that this was more than just a fight. This was about taking back everything I had lost. This was about reclaiming my life, my future, my freedom. As the final blow struck, and the last of our enemies fell, the silence that followed was deafening. The battle was over. The Vampire King stood beside me, his chest rising and falling with each breath. His face, though bloodied and bruised, was calm, his expression unreadable, but I could see the relief in his eyes. "We did it," he said, his voice soft but filled with certainty. I looked around at the aftermath of the battle, the bodies of our enemies scattered across the ground. It was over, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding anymore. The life I had always dreamed of was within reach. The future, once so uncertain, was now full of possibilities. "You're free, Lila," the Vampire King said, his voice a gentle whisper. "You're finally free." I looked up at him, my heart swelling with emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in so long. I had fought for this, fought for my freedom, fought for the life I had always deserved. And now, standing here, beside him, I knew that I had won. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, my voice full of gratitude and awe. He gave me a small, knowing smile. "You were always stronger than you knew," he said softly. "But you didn't have to do it alone. We did this together." In that moment, everything shifted. The fear, the uncertainty, the pain, they all faded into the background. What mattered now was the future. And with the Vampire King by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. Together, we had defeated the darkness. Together, we had found the light. And for the first time in my life, I knew what it truly meant to be free. Vampire stories are full of mystery, intrigue, and danger, but this one takes you on a journey of strength, resilience, and emotional growth. Follow Lila as she escapes a violent past, only to find herself drawn into a world far darker and more complicated than she could have imagined. Along the way, she discovers unexpected allies, a vampire king with a centuries-old history, and a love that defies all expectations. These vampire stories delve deep into themes of trust, vulnerability, and self-discovery, as Lila learns to face her fears and fight for the life she deserves. With every twist and turn, she and the Vampire King must confront not only their enemies, but also the ghosts of their pasts. As they prepare for an inevitable showdown, Lila's strength is tested like never before. Vampire stories like this remind us that true freedom comes from within, and that love can emerge even in the darkest of times. With thrilling action, emotional depth, and a romance that will keep you on the edge of your seat, this story captures the essence of everything we love about vampire stories: adventure, passion, and the fight for redemption.